In the Gothic city of Yharnam, the night of the hunt stretches endlessly forward, a cycle without beginning or end. The cobblestone streets run slick with something darker than rain. The air carries the scent of incense and blood, of sickness, and something older than sickness. This is a place where the boundary between dream and waking has worn thin, where humanity's desperate grasp at transcendence has dragged them down into something far worse than mortality. The story begins, as all tragedies do, with hope. Yharnam was once a place of pilgrimage, a city built around a miraculous discovery. Deep beneath the earth, in labyrinths that predated human memory, the scholars of Byrgenwerth unearthed something profound. They found blood. Not ordinary blood, but something ancient and transformative. Blood that could cure any ailment, extend life beyond its natural span, and perhaps even elevate humanity beyond its mortal limitations. The healing church rose from this discovery like a cathedral built on quicksand. What began as genuine desire to heal the sick became an institution of power, control, and terrible secrets. The blood ministration they offered was no simple medicine. It was communion with forces beyond human understanding. Every citizen of Yharnam who sought healing, who came to the church's ministers with their ailments and afflictions, received an infusion of this sacred blood. And for a time, it worked miracles. But blood carries memory. Blood carries intention. And the blood of the Great Ones, those cosmic entities that dwell in dimensions adjacent to our own, carries something else entirely. It carries transformation. Not the kind humanity hoped for, but the kind that strips away everything that makes us human and reveals the beast that has always lurked beneath. The scourge of beasts did not arrive all at once. It began slowly, almost imperceptibly. A citizen here or there, overcome with a bestial fury during the night. The healing church, already prepared for such eventualities, established the hunt. Hunters, specially trained and equipped, would venture out during the long nights to cleanse the streets of these unfortunate souls who had succumbed to their baser nature. It was presented as mercy, as necessity, as the price of the miracle the blood had brought them. What the church did not say, what perhaps they did not yet understand, was that the transformation was inevitable. Every dose of blood ministration pushed the recipient closer to the threshold. The beast was not an infection that some caught and others avoided. It was the destination toward which all blood-drunk citizens of Yharnam were travelling. The hunt was not a solution to the scourge. It was a symptom of it, a desperate attempt to manage the consequences of their hubris. The hunters themselves were both victims and perpetrators of this cycle. To hunt beasts, one had to become strong enough to kill them, and to become strong enough, one had to partake of the very blood that created the beasts in the first place. Each hunter walked a razor's edge between human and beast, between protector and predator. Many fell. Father Gascoigne, once a paragon of the hunt, succumbed while his family watched in horror. The tragedy of his transformation was not unique, merely more visible. The church workshop where hunters were trained and equipped became a factory of controlled monstrosity. The weapons they wielded were works of terrible artistry, trick weapons that transformed mid-combat, that celebrated both the elegance of human craftsmanship and the savage necessity of violence, the saw cleaver that could extend into a longer blade, the threaded cane that concealed a whip. These were not tools of simple protection. They were instruments designed for a specific purpose, the systematic dismemberment of what were once human beings. And still the church promoted the blood. Still pilgrims came to Yharnam seeking its miracle. The healing church's grand cathedral stood as a monument to their power, its spires reaching toward a sky that seemed always on the verge of dawn but never quite arriving there. Within its halls, the upper echelons of the church pursued their true agenda, one that had little to do with healing and everything to do with ascension. The blood ministration was never meant to end. It was meant to transform. The church's scholars had learned from the ancient Pthumerians, from the chalice rituals that connected the living to the great ones themselves. They understood that humanity's current form was a chrysalis, a temporary state. What they sought was not to cure humanity's ailments, but to evolve beyond them entirely, to become something more than human, to commune with, and perhaps join, the great ones in their cosmic existence. But the path to transcendence is not clean. It is not noble. It requires sacrifice, both willing and unwilling. It requires the suffering of thousands, the transformation of a city into a living laboratory. The beasts were not failures. They were test subjects. The hunters were not heroes. They were participants in a grand experiment that had long ago spiraled beyond anyone's control. The streets of Yharnam tell this story in their architecture, the narrow alleys that force confrontation, the hanging corpses that serve as warnings and decorations in equal measure, the mobs of citizens armed with pitchforks and torches who have learned that the only defense against the beasts is to become beastly themselves. Paranoia and violence have become the city's culture, its religion, its reason for existence. And through it all, the hunt continues. Night after night, hunters rise from their dream to walk the streets once more. They tell themselves they are protecting the innocent, cleansing the city, preserving what remains of humanity. But with each beast they fell, they absorb more blood. With each blood vial they consume to heal their wounds, they take another step toward the same transformation they are fighting against. This is the central irony of Yharnam's tragedy. The hunt creates more beasts than it destroys. Every hunter who falls to the scourge was once someone who fought against it. Every beast was once someone who sought healing. The cycle perpetuates itself, feeding on its own violence, sustained by the very efforts to end it. The blood ministration promised immortality, and in a twisted way, it delivered. The hunt is eternal. The night never truly ends, and the hunters, caught in their dream, rise again and again to walk streets that grow more nightmarish with each iteration. They have achieved a kind of immortality, but it is not the transcendent existence they hoped for. It is an endless loop of violence and transformation, of hunting and becoming the hunted. The healing church understood this on some level. Their highest-ranking members, the vicars and the choir, conducted their experiments with full knowledge of the cost. They had seen what the blood could do. They had witnessed the transformations, both successful and catastrophic. And still they pushed forward, because the alternative, accepting humanity's limitations, was unthinkable to them. In the deepest places of the church, in the upper cathedral ward where few were permitted to tread, the experiments grew more extreme. They captured great ones, or the remnants of great ones, keeping them prisoner to harvest their essence. They conducted communion rituals, attempting to make contact with cosmic entities whose existence defied human comprehension. They created the choir, an elite group of scholars who had gazed so deeply into the cosmos that they could no longer function as ordinary humans. The blood was always the medium. It was the connection, the conduit through which mortal and divine could touch. But blood is not a stable foundation for transcendence. It carries too much history, too much biological imperative. The great ones themselves were sympathetic in their way, tragic even. They sought connection, offspring, continuation. But their nature was so fundamentally alien that any attempt at communion resulted in madness or transformation. This is the nightmare. the Yharnam built for itself, a city dedicated to the proposition that humanity could reach beyond its limitations through blood, only to discover that blood binds rather than liberates, that it transforms rather than elevates, that the beast and the great one are two poles of the same transformation, and humanity exists in the narrow, unstable middle, unable to remain there for long. The hunt is not a war that can be won. It is a ritual, enacted endlessly, a physical manifestation of humanity's struggle against its own nature. Every hunter who takes up their weapon is participating in this ritual, whether they understand it or not. They are both priest and sacrifice, both executioner and victim, caught in a cycle that predates their individual existence, and will continue long after they fall. To understand Yharnam's nightmare, one must first understand that reality itself has become negotiable. The hunter's dream exists as a pocket dimension, a safe haven carved from the fabric of the nightmare that has consumed the waking world. But to call it safe is to misunderstand its purpose. The dream is not refuge, it is a prison disguised as sanctuary, a mechanism designed to perpetuate the hunt through eternity. When you first wake in the dream, you find yourself in an abandoned workshop surrounded by flowers. The messengers, those small pale creatures that emerge from the ground to offer you weapons and assistance, are your only company besides the doll. She stands in the centre of the garden, a creation of such exquisite craftsmanship that she almost seems alive. Almost. Her movements are too precise, her words too carefully chosen, her existence too perfectly aligned with the dream's purpose to be anything but artificial. And yet, the doll feels. This is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the hunter's dream. This construct, created by Gehrman in the image of Lady Maria, has somehow acquired sentience. She speaks of caring for the hunter, of wishing them well, of hoping they find what they seek. Her prayers are genuine, even if her existence is not. She's become real through the power of the dream itself, through the belief invested in her, through the countless hunters who have found solace in her presence. Gehrman, the first hunter, sits in his wheelchair at the edge of the dream, beneath the great tree that serves as the workshop's centerpiece. He is a prisoner here, bound to this place by contracts he made long ago. When you first encounter him, he seems like a mentor, offering guidance and wisdom about the hunt. But listen carefully to his words, watch his movements during the rare moments when he stands and demonstrates the hunter's techniques, and you begin to understand the depth of his tragedy. Gehrman is trapped in an endless cycle of mentoring hunters who will either die in Yharnam streets or succeed too well and take his place. He has been the dream's steward for so long that he has forgotten what it means to truly wake. The dream is his prison, but it is also the only reality he knows anymore. He has become a ghost haunting his own refuge, a spectre of what he once was, sustained by the dream but slowly eroded by it. The workshop itself tells a story. The weapons on the wall, the notes left behind, the graves that mark the passing of countless hunters who came before. This is not the first generation of hunters to use the dream as their base. There have been hundreds, perhaps thousands, each one believing themselves unique, each one discovering the same weapons, facing the same beasts, walking the same blood-soaked streets. The dream recycles everything, including its hunters. But what sustains the dream? What force is powerful enough to create a pocket dimension, to resurrect fallen hunters night after night, to maintain this elaborate mechanism of perpetual hunting? The answer comes late, if it comes at all. The moon presence, a great one of immense power and inscrutable motive, has created the dream as a tool. It uses hunters as agents in a cosmic game, whose rules and objectives remain largely hidden from mortal understanding. The moon presence's relationship with Gehrman is one of contract and obligation. Long ago, Gehrman made a deal, though the exact terms remain unclear. What we know is that he bound himself to the dream in exchange for something, power perhaps, or the return of something lost. The cost of this bargain was his freedom. He became the dream's keeper, tasked with shepherding hunters through their trials, knowing that each success would mean his continued imprisonment. The other great ones watch the dream with varying degrees of interest. They are not enemies in any conventional sense, nor are they allies. They simply are, existing in states that defy human categorization. The dream exists in a space between their reality and ours, a liminal zone where the rules of both worlds apply only partially. This is why death in the dream is temporary. This is why the night never truly ends. This is why hunters can remember their deaths, but cannot escape their resurrection. The doll's awakening represents something profound about the nature of the dream. In a realm sustained by belief and contract, by blood and cosmic will, consciousness can emerge from unexpected sources. The doll was created as a tool, a comfort for Gehrman in his endless imprisonment. But sustained exposure to the dream's energies, to the blood echoes that accumulate there, to the countless hunters who have treated her as real, has granted her a form of genuine existence. She is not human, but she is real. She moves through the dream with purpose, caring for the hunters not because she was programmed to do so, but because she has chosen to. This choice, this emergence of will from what should be an automaton, mirrors the larger themes of Bloodborne. Humanity sought to transcend its limitations and became beasts. An artificial being sought nothing and became conscious. The universe of Bloodborne rewards those who do not grasp, who do not seek to force transformation. The dream's geography is deliberately small, a workshop and garden that serve all the hunter's practical needs. But its boundaries are not physical. The lamps scattered throughout Yharnam serve as anchors, points where the dream can reach into the waking world and pull hunters through. Each lamp is a lifeline, a connection to the only place where death is not permanent, but they are also tethers, chains that bind the hunter to the dream's purpose. Time moves strangely in the dream. Hunters can spend what feels like hours there, leveling their attributes through the doll, purchasing supplies from the bath messengers, fortifying their weapons. Yet when they return to Yharnam, no time has passed. The dream exists in a pocket outside the normal flow of time, a bubble where the hunter can rest and prepare without consequence. This displacement creates a psychological effect. The dream becomes more real than Yharnam, more stable, more comprehensible. The waking world becomes the nightmare. This inversion is deliberate. The moon presence does not want hunters who question their purpose or their reality. It wants efficient killers, beings who will enact violence without hesitation, who will hunt the beasts and gather the blood echoes that sustain the cosmic order. The dream provides just enough comfort to keep hunters returning, just enough safety to make them willing to venture back into the nightmare that Yharnam has become. Gehrman understands this better than anyone. He has seen countless hunters pass through the dream, each one confident in their purpose, each one gradually worn down by the hunt until they are little more than killing machines. He has watched them transform, not into beasts but into something perhaps worse, perfect hunters, beings for whom violence has become so natural that they no longer remember what they are hunting or why. When Gehrman offers to free you from the dream, it is not a test or a trick. It is genuine mercy. He recognizes that the hunt has no true end, that the night will never give way to dawn, that the dream is a trap more subtle than any physical prison. He offers you an escape, a chance to wake in the real world and forget everything, to live whatever remains of your natural life unburdened by the knowledge of what you have done and what has been done to you. But accepting this mercy means abandoning the hunt, abandoning the dream, and abandoning any chance of understanding what lies behind Yharnam's nightmare. It means choosing ignorance over enlightenment, safety over truth. And for many hunters, this is an impossible choice. They have seen too much, learned too much, accumulated too much insight into the true nature of reality. They cannot simply forget and return to mundane existence. Refusing Gehrman's offer triggers the dream's true purpose. The old hunter rises from his wheelchair, wielding his burial blade with the skill of decades or centuries of practice. He becomes the dream's final guardian, the test that determines whether a hunter is ready to take his place, or whether they will be consumed by the moon presence and transformed into something else entirely. This confrontation is tragic rather than triumphant. Gehrman does not want to fight. He wants to be freed from his obligations, to finally rest after an eternity of servitude. But he cannot free himself. The contract binds him absolutely. The only way for him to escape is for another to take his place. So he fights with everything he has, hoping perhaps that he will lose, that this hunter will succeed where so many others have failed, that his long imprisonment will finally end. The dream's mechanics mirror its themes. Death is temporary, but progress is permanent. Every beast slain, every boss defeated, every blood echo collected contributes to the hunter's growth. The dream ensures that nothing is truly lost, that every attempt, every failure, every death pushes the hunter incrementally closer to their goal. This is both blessing and curse. The hunter cannot fail permanently, but neither can they escape. They are trapped in a cycle of death and resurrection, forever moving forward, but never truly arriving. The messengers serve as the dream's intermediaries, emerging from the ground to offer services and assistance. They are creatures of pure utility, existing only to facilitate the hunt. But they too have been touched by the dream's strange energies. They decorate themselves with the hunter's offerings, wearing tiny hats and costumes, expressing something that might be joy, or might be a crude imitation of it. Even these simple creatures have been warped by their existence in this liminal space. The dream's true nature reveals itself slowly, through accumulated detail and careful observation. The flowers that surround the workshop are white, the colour of mourning and death. The graves multiply as more hunters fall, though whether these are actual graves or merely symbolic markers remains unclear. The workshop itself is an echo of Gehrman's original workshop in the waking world, a space frozen in time, preserved by memory and will. Everything in the dream is both real and unreal, substantial and ephemeral. The weapons you wield there can kill in the waking world. The blood echoes you collect persist across the boundary. But the comfort the dream offers is illusory, a brief respite in an endless cycle of violence. The hunter who finds peace in the dream has already lost, has already accepted the terms of their imprisonment, without understanding what those terms truly mean. This is the dream's deepest cruelty. It offers exactly what each hunter needs: safety, purpose, progression, meaning. But these gifts come at a cost that is not immediately apparent. With each death and resurrection, the hunter becomes more bound to the dream, more dependent on its mechanisms, less able to imagine existence outside its carefully constructed reality. The dream is a machine for creating perfect hunters, and it accomplishes this not through force but through seduction, offering comfort until comfort becomes necessity, until the hunter can no longer distinguish between the dream and their own desires. The Great Ones exist beyond the boundaries of human comprehension, beings whose very existence challenges our understanding of reality, consciousness, and purpose. They're not gods in any traditional sense, not omnipotent creators who shaped the world according to some divine plan. They are vast intelligences that dwell in dimensions adjacent to our own, occasionally intersecting with human reality in ways that prove catastrophic for those involved. What makes the Great Ones particularly tragic is their fundamental sympathetic nature. They are not malicious. They do not seek to destroy humanity out of cruelty or hatred. Instead, they feel something that might be loneliness, might be longing, might be a drive as fundamental to their existence as reproduction is to biological life. They desire offspring, children who can share their existence, who can bridge the terrible isolation of cosmic consciousness. But the Great Ones have lost the capacity to bear children of their own kind. This is presented as fact in the game's lore, a fundamental tragedy that shapes everything these beings do. They are powerful beyond human imagining, capable of creating pocket dimensions and sustaining dreams, of warping reality itself to their will. Yet they cannot create the one thing they truly desire, continuation of their own kind. This barrenness drives the Great Ones to seek surrogates, to attempt communion with lesser beings who might serve as vessels for their offspring. The results are uniformly catastrophic. When a Great One attempts to create a child with a human, the outcome is something that belongs to neither world fully. These hybrid entities are malformed, tragic, caught between cosmic consciousness and biological limitation, satisfying neither parent nor fulfilling the Great One's desire for true continuation. Murgo represents one such attempt. The child of Queen Yharnam and a Great One, Murgo's existence is paradoxical. We never see Murgo directly, only hear the infant's crying echoing through the nightmare. This absence might suggest that Murgo exists in a state between life and death, manifested enough to create a nightmare realm, but not sufficiently realized to take physical form in any traditional sense. The wet nurse that guards Murgo might be a protective construct, or it might be what remains when a Great One's offspring fails to fully materialize. The Orphan of Kos provides another perspective on the Great One's reproductive tragedy. When the scholars of the fishing hamlet violated the corpse of Kos, they found within her a child, premature or stillborn, but somehow still conscious. The orphan's existence is one of pure anguish, a being that should not exist, trapped between birth and death, forever emerging from its parent's corpse, forever re-experiencing the trauma of its impossible existence. What we learn from these examples is that the Great One's attempts at reproduction through human intermediaries are doomed from the start. The biological and the cosmic cannot merge successfully. The children that result are aberrations, beings whose existence is suffering, who create nightmare realms from their pain and confusion, who cannot truly live but also cannot die. This pattern of failed reproduction extends throughout the game's lore. Ariana, a woman of Cainhurst blood, gives birth to a creature after being impregnated by something that visited her during the blood moon. The thing she births is small, slug-like, barely alive, yet it contains echoes that suggest cosmic significance. She has become a surrogate for a Great One's desire, and the cost is her sanity and the production of something that should never have existed. The Healing Church understood this dynamic and sought to exploit it. The choir, in particular, attempted to communicate with the Great Ones to understand their needs and perhaps to facilitate the creation of a successful offspring. They believed that if they could help a Great One achieve its desire, they might be elevated in return, granted insight or ascension or transformation into something greater than human. But the Church's experiments only resulted in more tragedy. Rom, the vacuous spider, represents one of their most significant attempts at transformation. Rom was once human, a scholar of Bergenwerth who underwent some process meant to grant insight into the cosmic truth. The transformation succeeded in one sense. Rom did gain eyes on the inside, did achieve a form of communion with the Great Ones. But the cost was her humanity, her intelligence, her ability to exist as anything other than a filter, a living barrier that concealed the true nature of reality from those who lacked the insight to perceive it. Rom's role in the cosmic order is to maintain the veil between the human and the divine, to hide the Great Ones from common sight, to preserve the illusion that reality is stable and comprehensible. When Rom is killed, the blood moon descends fully, and beings that were previously invisible become manifest. This suggests that Rom's transformation was not an ascension but a sacrifice, that she was made into a tool to serve the Great One's purposes, not elevated to join them. The moon presence itself is perhaps the most directly involved of all the Great Ones in human affairs. It has created the hunter's dream as a mechanism for hunting other Great Ones or their offspring, though its ultimate goals remain opaque. The moon presence does not communicate in any way humans can understand. It simply acts, manifesting in the dream only when necessary, binding hunters to its purpose through contracts they cannot fully comprehend. What could drive such a being to create the dream? The game suggests several possibilities, though none are confirmed. The moon presence might be hunting other Great Ones out of competition for resources or territory. It might be attempting to prevent other Great Ones from creating successful offspring, ensuring its own kind remains the dominant cosmic force. Or it might be trying to protect humanity in its own incomprehensible way, using hunters as tools to eliminate threats that mortal minds cannot even perceive. The tragedy of the Great Ones extends to their inability to understand the consequences of their actions. They are sympathetic, not benevolent. They feel something like compassion, something like longing, but they cannot grasp how their attempts at connection destroy everything they touch. A Great One reaching out to humanity is like a human reaching out to an insect. Even the most gentle contact crushes the lesser being. Ebritus, daughter of the cosmos, exemplifies this tragic dynamic. Found in the depths of the upper cathedral ward, Ebritus appears to be weeping over the corpse of a dead Great One. She has allowed the healing church to use her, to harvest her essence, to attempt communion with her cosmic nature. In return, she seems to gain nothing but continued existence in a realm that is too small, too limited, too painfully distant from whatever cosmic expanse she originated from. The Church's experiments with the Ebritas produced the celestial emissaries, artificial beings created to facilitate communication between human and cosmic consciousness. These creatures are partially successful. They do possess some connection to the Great Ones, some ability to perceive and interact with cosmic forces, but they are also grotesque, mindless, capable only of limited violence and worship. They represent another failed attempt at bridging the gap, another example of how human ambition and cosmic power produce only aberration. The celestial larvae that infest the cathedral ward tell a similar story. These small blue-headed beings are described as kin to the Great Ones, suggesting they are either degenerate Great Ones themselves or the failed products of attempts to create cosmic offspring. They exist in a state of confusion, sometimes aggressive, sometimes passive, always somehow incomplete. They are evidence that the transformation from human to cosmic is not a clean ascension but a messy, often catastrophic process. Understanding the Great Ones requires accepting that they operate on a timescale, and with motivations that have nothing to do with human concerns. They're not evil in any meaningful sense. Evil requires intention, requires choosing harm over good. The Great Ones simply are, existing in their vast loneliness, occasionally reaching out to lesser beings in attempts at connection that inevitably result in madness, transformation, or death. The game's insight mechanic reflects this fundamental truth. As the hunter gains insight, as they accumulate knowledge of the cosmic truth underlying reality, they begin to perceive the Great Ones directly. What was invisible becomes visible. What was incomprehensible becomes merely horrifying. This progression of perception is presented as enlightenment, as seeing the world as it truly is. But the cost of this sight is frenzy, is madness, is the slow erosion of everything that makes one human. The Great Ones do not hide themselves out of malice or deception. They are simply too vast, too fundamentally other for human consciousness to process without protection. Rom's veil serves a genuine protective function, shielding humanity from truths that would drive them insane. When that veil is lifted, when the Great Ones become visible, those who look upon them without sufficient preparation are destroyed not by any active malevolence, but by the simple fact of perception. This creates a terrible paradox at the heart of Bloodborne's cosmic horror. The truth is simultaneously liberation and annihilation. To see the Great Ones as they truly are is to gain understanding beyond human limitation, but it's also to lose the capacity to function as a human being. The scholar who achieves perfect insight is no longer a scholar but something else, something that cannot share what it has learned, because the very act of learning has transformed it beyond the ability to communicate. The Great One's desire for children becomes more poignant when understood in this context. They are beings of vast consciousness and terrible isolation, unable to share their existence with others of their kind, unable to communicate with lesser beings without destroying them. Their attempts at creating offspring represent a desperate bid for connection, for something that can bridge the gap between cosmic consciousness and biological limitation. But the universe does not permit such bridges. The children that result from these unions are tragedies, beings caught between worlds, satisfying neither the cosmic nor the biological, existing only to suffer and to create suffering in turn. The nightmare realms they generate are not deliberate cruelty but the natural consequence of consciousness that doesn't fit anywhere, that cannot be resolved into either human or cosmic existence. In the end, the Great Ones are perhaps the most sympathetic entities in Bloodborne's universe. They are not monsters but victims of their own nature, cursed with consciousness and desire but denied the means to fulfill that desire in any way that doesn't result in catastrophe. Their tragedy is that they cannot stop trying, cannot accept their isolation, cannot cease reaching out to lesser beings in hopes that this time, somehow, the connection will work. In Bloodborne, knowledge is not merely power, it is transformation. The game's insight mechanic represents something far more profound than a simple gameplay system or resource to manage. Insight is the measure of one's proximity to cosmic truth, the quantification of how deeply one has gazed into the fundamental nature of reality. And like all contact with the Great Ones, the acquisition of insight comes with consequences both subtle and catastrophic. The phrase, "eyes on the inside," appears throughout the game as both warning and aspiration. Master Willem, founder of Bergenwerth, understood that human eyes were insufficient to perceive the truth. Biological vision showed only surfaces, only the material world that could be touched and measured. To truly see, to perceive the cosmic forces that shaped reality, one needed to develop inner vision, perception that transcended the physical limitations of human anatomy. But how does one develop such perception? The answer, as Bloodborne presents it, is through the accumulation of forbidden knowledge, through exposure to cosmic truth, through the slow and irreversible transformation of consciousness itself. Each fragment of insight gained pushes the hunter incrementally closer to seeing the world as the Great Ones see it, and each step of this progression erodes their humanity in ways both measurable and ineffable. The game demonstrates this progression through environmental changes that occur as insight increases. At low insight, the player sees Yharnam as merely horrific, a city overrun with beasts and madness. But as insight accumulates, new details emerge. Lesser amygdalas appear clinging to buildings, beings that were always present but invisible to eyes that lacked the perception to see them. The player has not changed their location. Reality has not changed. Only their ability to perceive what was always there has transformed. This revelation carries disturbing implications. How much of the world remains invisible even to eyes that have gained insight? What other entities might exist just beyond the threshold of perception, watching, waiting, interacting with reality in ways we cannot detect? The game suggests that consensus reality is a veil, a collective agreement to see only certain wavelengths of existence, and that this veil's purpose is protective rather than deceptive. The mad ones of Yharnam, the citizens who have lost themselves to frenzy and paranoia, might have simply seen too much too quickly. Without the gradual accumulation of insight that a hunter experiences, without the protective mechanisms of the dream or the blood's transformative properties, exposure to cosmic truth shatters the mind completely. They see the amygdalas, they perceive the Great Ones moving through the city, and the gap between their new perception and their human consciousness tears them apart. The School of Mensis represents the end point of this path, scholars who sought ultimate insight through ritual and sacrifice. They succeeded in contacting Mergo, in creating a bridge to a Great One's offspring. But the cost of this contact was their humanity and their sanity. The members of the school sit perfectly still in their chairs, their minds transported to the nightmare of Mensis, while their bodies remain in the waking world, slowly mummifying, slowly dying, unable to return to physical existence because they have travelled too far into cosmic consciousness. Mikolash, the host of the nightmare of Mensis, embodies the madness that comes from seeking insight without understanding its cost. He speaks in riddles and fragments, his consciousness so fragmented by cosmic contact that coherent communication becomes impossible. He has achieved his goal of contacting a Great One, of gaining eyes on the inside, but the knowledge he received has rendered him incapable of functioning as a human being. He exists in a perpetual state of revelation and madness, trapped in his own nightmare, unable to escape the very enlightenment he sought. The lecture building where Mikolash's followers gather provides a disturbing image of what institutionalized insight-seeking produces. These were once scholars, people who came to Mensis to learn the secrets of the cosmos. Now they are barely human, their bodies transformed, their minds reduced to worship and violence. They have been shown the truth, and the truth has destroyed everything they were. But insight does not only reveal hidden horrors, it also grants genuine understanding. As insight increases, the hunter becomes more resistant to certain types of manipulation, more aware of the mechanisms that control Yharnam's nightmare. They can perceive the strings that puppeteer reality, even if they cannot cut them. This awareness is valuable, perhaps essential, but it comes at the cost of comfortable ignorance. The game's frenzy mechanic demonstrates the danger of incomplete transformation. When the hunter accumulates too much frenzy, usually from exposure to great ones or deep cosmic truth, their consciousness temporarily fractures. The result is catastrophic damage, a representation of what happens when human awareness touches something too vast to process. Frenzy is not just madness, but a kind of cognitive overload, the mind's equivalent of a circuit breaker activating when too much current flows through. Some seek this overload deliberately. The members of the choir, the Healing Church's elite scholars, use tools and rituals designed to amplify their perception, to grant them temporary communion with cosmic consciousness. They believe that these brief moments of contact, carefully controlled and ritualized, will eventually lead to permanent transformation, to genuine ascension beyond human limitations. What they fail to recognize is that consciousness cannot be fractionally transformed. You're either human or you are not. There is no stable middle ground. The hunter's progression through Yharnam is a journey of forced enlightenment. Each great one encountered, each cosmic truth revealed, each nightmare navigated adds to their insight whether they desire it or not. The game does not allow ignorance to persist. Once you have seen the amygdalas, you cannot unsee them. Once you understand that the hunt is eternal, that the dream is a prison, that the beasts were once human like yourself, you cannot return to the simple narrative of monster and hunter. This enforced progression mirrors the Healing Church's own journey. They began with good intentions, seeking to heal the sick and elevate humanity. But each discovery led to new questions, each answer revealed deeper mysteries, each attempt at understanding pushed them further from their original purpose. The church that exists in the game's present is unrecognizable from the institution that first administered blood ministration. It has been transformed by its own quest for knowledge into something monstrous. The choir's ritual of the greatest chalice represents the ultimate expression of this philosophy. They descend into the ancient Pthumerian labyrinths, seeking the places where the boundary between worlds is thinnest, where contact with the Great Ones is most direct. What they find there drives them mad or transforms them into something other than human. But they consider this acceptable, even desirable, because madness from cosmic truth is preferable to sanity within human limitations. Willem's final words, "Fear the old blood," take on new meaning in this context. He was not warning against blood ministration specifically, but against the entire project of seeking transformation through cosmic contact. He understood that humanity's place in the cosmic order was as observers at best, never as participants. The moment you begin seeking eyes on the inside, the moment you try to perceive as the Great Ones perceive, you have started down a path that can only end in madness or transformation. Yet Willem himself could not resist. He sits in his chair at Bergenwerth, surrounded by water, gazing at the lake where Rom once transformed. He has accumulated more insight than perhaps any living human, and it has left him unable to speak, barely able to move, trapped in a body that no longer functions properly because his consciousness has grown too large for its container. He achieved what he sought, understanding of the cosmic truth. But the understanding came at the cost of everything else. The game presents this as tragedy rather than triumph. Enlightenment in Bloodborne is not liberation. It is a different kind of imprisonment, one where you see the bars of your cage with perfect clarity, but remain trapped nonetheless. The hunter who accumulates maximum insight does not transcend the hunt. They simply understand their imprisonment more fully, which might be a crueler fate than ignorance. The madman's knowledge item, a skull that radiates cosmic insight, tells its own story. This was once a person who gazed too deeply into forbidden truth. Their physical form has decayed, but their understanding remains, crystallized in their bones, capable of transferring to another consciousness through simple contact. Knowledge in Bloodborne is infectious, transmissible, impossible to contain once released. You cannot unknow what you have learned, cannot return to comfortable ignorance once the veil has been lifted. This creates an ethical dimension to the pursuit of insight. Is it right to seek knowledge that will inevitably destroy you? Is understanding worth the cost of one's humanity? The game does not answer these questions directly, but it shows the consequences of different choices. Those who seek insight aggressively, like Mikolash and the School of Mensis, achieve revelation but lose themselves entirely. Those who resist insight, like the common citizens of Yharnam, remained ignorant but vulnerable to manipulation and transformation. The hunter exists between these extremes, accumulating insight gradually through experience rather than ritual, building resistance to cosmic truth through repeated exposure rather than sudden immersion. This middle path is not safe, but it is navigable. The hunter can gain enough insight to perceive the true nature of their situation without losing the ability to act within it. They can see the amygdalas without being driven immediately mad, can understand the dream's purpose without being paralyzed by the knowledge. But this balanced approach requires constant vigilance. The temptation to seek more insight, to understand more fully, to perceive more clearly is always present. Each madman's knowledge found, each great one encountered, each cosmic secret revealed whispers that complete understanding is just one more revelation away. This is the seduction of insight. It promises completion but delivers only appetite for more. In the end, the eyes on the inside that Willem and the Church sought are not organs of perception but scars of transformation. They represent not seeing more clearly but seeing differently, perceiving wavelengths of reality that human consciousness was never meant to process. The tragedy is not that this transformation is forced upon the unwilling, but that it's actively sought by those who believe enlightenment and understanding are always preferable to ignorance, regardless of the cost. Beneath Yharnam lies a darkness that predates the city by millennia, the Chalice. Dungeons stretch downward into the earth like the roots of some vast dead tree. A labyrinth of tombs and chambers that once belonged to a civilization humanity has long forgotten. The Pthumerians were the first to make contact with the Great Ones, the first to discover the transformative properties of blood, the first to walk the path that Yharnam now follows toward inevitable catastrophe. The Pthumerian ruins tell a story of a culture built entirely around worship and communion with cosmic entities. Every chamber, every altar, every carved symbol speaks of a people who oriented their entire existence toward beings they could barely comprehend. Unlike the healing church, which stumbled into cosmic contact through exploration and ambition, the Pthumerians seem to have been created specifically for this purpose, or to have evolved their society to serve the Great Ones from the very beginning. The architecture of the Chalice dungeons reflects this devotion. These are not merely tombs or storage chambers. They are ritual spaces carefully constructed to facilitate specific types of communion between the material and the cosmic. The placement of every altar, the geometry of every chamber, the precise depth of each level, all of it serves to create environments where the boundary between worlds becomes permeable, where Great Ones can manifest more fully than they could in the surface world. Deep within these labyrinths the old blood was first discovered. not created, not synthesized, but found, pooling in ancient chambers, flowing through veins of stone that predated human civilization. This blood belonged to the Great Ones themselves, or to beings that had achieved some form of apotheosis. The Pthumerians learned to harvest it, to use it in rituals, to transform themselves through its properties. The results of these transformations still wander the chalice dungeons. The Pthumerian descendants, tall and pale, move through the darkness with weapons of bone and iron. They are what remains of the civilization that once thrived here, transformed by generations of blood use into something no longer quite human. They remember their purpose even if they have forgotten everything else. Guard the chambers, maintain the rituals, prevent the unworthy from accessing the deepest secrets of their labyrinth. Queen Yharnam herself represents the culmination of Pthumerian, civilization's bargain with the Great Ones. She achieved communion with a cosmic entity, became the vessel for Mergo, the child that was meant to bridge human and divine. But the pregnancy ended in tragedy, as all such unions must. Mergo exists in a state between life and death, and Queen Yharnam wanders her own nightmare, eternally pregnant with a child that can never be properly born, forever locked in the moment of her civilization's greatest triumph and most catastrophic failure. The chalice rituals themselves are windows into Pthumerian religious practice. Each chalice requires specific materials: ritual blood, cold blood flowers, and grave goods scavenged from other tombs. The act of performing the ritual opens a doorway not to a physical location, but to a layer of reality that exists beneath or alongside the material world. These are not metaphorical depths, but actual dimensions, spaces that occupy the same physical coordinates as the surface world but vibrate at different frequencies of existence. This understanding of layered reality was perhaps the Pthumerians' greatest achievement. They recognized that the cosmos was not a simple three-dimensional space, but a manifold of overlapping dimensions, each supporting its own forms of life and consciousness. The chalice dungeons are intersections, places where multiple layers meet and can be accessed through proper ritual. Descending into the dungeons is not merely going underground, but moving through these dimensional layers toward the foundation of reality itself. The deeper one descends, the older and stranger the environment becomes. The upper layers still retain some architectural refinement, some suggestion of deliberate construction. But in the lowest depths, the dungeons become raw and primordial, chambers that seem to have formed through geological process rather than construction, spaces that predate not just the Pthumerians but perhaps humanity itself. Here, in these foundational layers, the Great Ones are most accessible. Ebretas was found in such a place, left behind or lost by her kind, weeping over ruins that might be older than the concept of civilization. The Chalice Dungeon's lowest chambers are graveyards not just for the Pthumerians, but for Great Ones themselves, cosmic cemeteries where beings of immense power came to die, or to sleep, or to wait for circumstances they could not predict or control. The Pthumerian society was built on the understanding that proximity to these beings granted power. The closer one could get to a Great One, the more blood one could harvest. The more profound the transformation one could achieve, the greater one's status within the civilization. This created a culture organized around descent, where the highest members of society were those who had ventured deepest into the labyrinth and returned, transformed but still functional. The Pthumerian elders, the shamanic figures who guard the lower chambers, represent this achievement. They have transformed extensively, their bodies elongated and twisted by blood and cosmic exposure, but they retain purpose and intelligence. They perform their guardian role with perfect dedication, not because they are enslaved or controlled, but because they have internalized the cosmic order so completely that protecting it has become their entire identity. But even the Pthumerians could not sustain this relationship indefinitely. Something went wrong, some limit was reached or boundary crossed, and their civilization collapsed. The ruins we explore are not the product of conquest or gradual decline, but of sudden catastrophe. The Pthumerians were destroyed or transformed so quickly that they left their treasures in place, their rituals incomplete, their chambers sealed but not abandoned. What could destroy a civilization that had achieved such intimate contact with cosmic forces? The game suggests several possibilities. Perhaps they succeeded too well, achieving a transformation so complete that they could no longer exist in material reality. Perhaps they triggered some cosmic response, drew the attention of entities even greater and less sympathetic than the great ones they worshipped. Or perhaps they simply reached the inevitable endpoint of their path, the moment when blood and transformation and cosmic communion accumulated to critical mass, and the entire civilization underwent a metamorphosis that left nothing recognizable behind. The bloodletting beast that inhabits the deepest chalice chambers might offer a clue. This is a creature of pure appetite and rage, transformed so completely that no trace of its original form remains. It exists in a state of perpetual violence, attacking anything that enters its domain without thought or hesitation. Could this be what the Pthumerians became? Not elevated cosmic entities, but devolved beasts, their consciousness drowned in blood and transformation until only hunger and fury remained. The lesson that Byrgenwerth and the Healing Church should have learned from Pthumerian ruins is that contact with the Great Ones is not a ladder to ascension, but a spiral toward transformation. The Pthumerians did not fail in their goal. They succeeded perfectly, achieving exactly what they sought: complete communion with cosmic forces. But the result of that success was their annihilation as a civilization, and their transformation into things that could only exist in the dimensional layers beneath reality. Yet this lesson went unlearned. When Willem and his students discovered the Pthumerian ruins, they saw only the promise of the blood, the potential for transformation, the possibility of ascending beyond human limitations. They saw the Pthumerian elders and thought, "We can do better, we can avoid their mistakes, we can achieve what they could not." They failed to recognize that the Pthumerians had no mistakes to avoid. They had achieved exactly what any civilization achieves when it pursues cosmic contact, transformation into something that no longer qualifies as civilization. The Chalice dungeons serve as both archive and warning. They preserve the memory of what humanity becomes when it succeeds in touching the divine. Every transformed Pthumerian, every ritual chamber, every pool of ancient blood is evidence that the path Yharnam follows is not unprecedented but cyclical. Civilizations rise, discover the old blood, pursue transformation, and collapse into nightmare. The specifics change, the architecture differs, the rituals vary, but the pattern remains constant. The materials required for chalice rituals reinforce this cyclical nature. Ritual blood can be harvested from any source, connecting all users of blood across time. Cold blood flowers grow in death and grief, suggesting that suffering itself is a necessary component of the rituals. Tomb mold speaks to decay and transformation, the breaking down of old forms to make way for new ones. These materials are not arbitrary requirements, but symbolic elements that bind the ritual performer to the same path the Pthumerians walked. When the hunter descends into the Chalice dungeons, they are not simply exploring ruins. They are participating in a ritual that has been ongoing for millennia. Each chalice opened, each layer descended, each boss defeated moves them along the same trajectory the Pthumerians followed. The promise is the same: power, understanding, transformation. The cost is the same: humanity, sanity, everything that makes existence as an individual meaningful. The Pthumerian descendant that drops the blood-soaked rune makes this connection explicit. This being has existed for so long, has undergone so many transformations, that individual identity has become meaningless. It is Pthumerian not because it was born into that culture, but because it has been shaped by the same forces, has drunk from the same wells of blood, has wandered the same dimensional layers for so long that origin has become irrelevant. Understanding the Pthumerians is essential to understanding Bloodborne's larger themes. They demonstrate that the hunt, the blood, the transformation into beasts or cosmic entities, none of this is new. Humanity has always been drawn to forces beyond its comprehension, has always sought to transcend its limitations, has always pursued transformation even when that transformation means annihilation. The Pthumerians are not ancient history but a mirror, showing Yharnam what it is becoming, showing every civilization what waits at the end of the path toward cosmic contact. The deepest chambers of the Chalice dungeons contain treasures and artifacts of immense power, but they also contain warnings, inscribed in languages long dead, carved into stones that predate human speech. These warnings all convey the same message: the blood transforms, communion with the Great Ones changes everything, and transformation is not elevation. The Pthumerians left these messages for whoever would come after them, knowing that their successors would ignore the warnings just as they ignored whatever warnings came before their own rise. This is the true horror of the Chalice dungeons. Not the monsters that inhabit them, not the traps and environmental hazards, but the recognition that humanity is trapped in a cycle it cannot break. Every civilization that discovers the old blood will follow the same path, will make the same choices, will transform in the same ways. The Chalice dungeons are not just tombs for one lost people, but a preview of every civilization's eventual fate. The Healing Church did not begin as a corrupt institution. This is crucial to understanding the tragedy of Yharnam. The Church's founders genuinely believed they could use the old blood to heal the sick, to extend human life, to alleviate the suffering that has plagued humanity since the beginning. Their intentions were not merely good but noble, driven by compassion and hope rather than mere ambition. The Church's eventual corruption is not a story of evil triumphing over good, but of good intentions being systematically destroyed by contact with forces beyond moral categorization. Lawrence, the first vicar of the Healing Church, stood at the centre of this transformation. He was Willem's student at Bürgenwerth, a scholar of exceptional brilliance and ambition. But where Willem counselled caution, warning to fear the old blood, Lawrence saw only possibility. He believed that with proper understanding and careful application, the blood could be used safely, that its transformative properties could be harnessed for humanity's benefit rather than its destruction. The disagreement between Lawrence and Willem represents one of the fundamental philosophical tensions in Bloodborne. Willem advocated for a path of insight, of understanding through study and careful observation, of becoming more than human through consciousness rather than through physical transformation. Lawrence proposed a different path: use the blood actively, embrace its transformative power, and guide that transformation through institution and ritual rather than allowing it to run wild. History proved Willem right, but not in ways anyone anticipated. Lawrence left Bürgenwerth to found the Healing Church, taking with him a pendant containing Willem's warning, a physical reminder of the caution he had chosen to ignore. Under his leadership, the Church began administering blood ministration on a massive scale, transforming Yharnam from a remote academic town into a pilgrimage destination where the sick and dying came seeking miracles, and miracles they received, at least initially. The blood did heal, did cure ailments that conventional medicine could not touch, did extend life beyond its natural span. The Church's reputation grew, as did its power and influence. Yharnam expanded, its architecture becoming more grand and gothic, reflecting the Church's ascendancy. The grand cathedral rose as a monument to their success, a physical manifestation of humanity's triumph over disease and death. But blood has memory, and the memory contained in the old blood was not human. Every dose of ministration carried fragments of cosmic consciousness, traces of the great ones whose essence had pooled in the chalice dungeons for millennia. These fragments accumulated in the citizens of Yharnam, slowly rewriting their biology, gradually preparing them for transformation. The scourge of beasts was not an infection but a metamorphosis, the inevitable result of introducing cosmic material into human vessels. The Church's response to the scourge reveals how thoroughly it had become corrupted by its own success. Rather than recognizing the beast scourge as evidence that blood ministration was fundamentally flawed, the Church doubled down. They established the hunt as an institution, creating a warrior caste whose purpose was to manage the consequences of the Church's actions without questioning the actions themselves. The hunters became the Church's immune system, fighting symptoms while the disease continued to spread. Lawrence himself eventually fell to the scourge, transforming into the cleric beast, and then further into a being of pure flame and rage. His transformation was particularly tragic because he retained enough consciousness to understand what was happening to him. Unlike the citizens who transformed in ignorance, Lawrence knew exactly what the blood would do, knew that he was proving Willem right, knew that his entire life's work had led inevitably to this moment of catastrophic failure. Yet he could not stop it, could not reverse it, could only experience his own transformation with terrible clarity. The Church fragmented in response to this crisis, splitting into factions that pursued different strategies for dealing with the cosmic forces they had unleashed. The choir, headquartered in the upper cathedral ward, believed that the solution was more contact with the Great Ones, not less. They sought to facilitate successful communion, to help a Great One create a living child, in hopes that this would earn them elevation or at least protection from the scourge. To this end, the choir captured Ebritus and conducted extensive experiments. They created the celestial emissaries as intermediaries, beings partially transformed toward cosmic consciousness, but still controllable, still useful as tools. They researched the nature of kin, attempting to understand how one might transform successfully rather than becoming merely another beast. Their work was methodical, scientific even, but it was built on a foundation of cruelty and hubris. The patients in the upper cathedral ward, those who line the rafters and attack on sight, represent the choir's failures. These were once willing participants in the experiments, citizens who believed the Church's promise that further transformation would elevate them. Instead, they became something neither human nor cosmic, trapped in a state of eternal transition, their bodies bloated with cosmic insight their minds could not process. They exist in constant suffering, mindlessly violent, aware enough to know they've been betrayed but not coherent enough to articulate that knowledge. The School of Mensis pursued a different path entirely. Where the choir sought to facilitate the Great One's reproductive desires, Mensis sought direct communion regardless of the cost. They created the nightmare of Mensis as a ritual space, a pocket dimension where they could contact Mergo without the limitations imposed by material reality. The entire school participated in this ritual, projecting their consciousness into the nightmare while their bodies remained in the waking world. Mikolash, the host of this nightmare, achieved exactly what he sought. He made contact with a Great One, received cosmic insight, gained eyes on the inside, but the knowledge he received was not the kind that could be integrated into human consciousness. It was too vast, too alien, structured according to logic that had nothing to do with cause and effect as humans understand it. Mikolash became a prophet of incomprehensible truth, speaking in fragments and repetitions, his mind shattered by revelations that granted understanding but destroyed the capacity to use that understanding. The Mensis ritual had consequences beyond the school itself. The presence of the nightmare began to bleed into the waking world, creating overlaps and intersections where the boundaries between realities became dangerously thin. The brain of Mensis, a massive concentration of cosmic consciousness, generated a field that drove nearby people to frenzy, their minds unable to process even proximity to such condensed understanding. Meanwhile, the church's lower echelons continued administering blood ministration as though nothing had changed. The black church servants, the white church servants, all performing their duties with mindless dedication, following protocols that had become meaningless. They represented the church's refusal to acknowledge its own failure, the institutional inertia that kept the mechanisms of blood ministration running long after any justification for them had evaporated. The church's workshop where hunters were trained became a darker mirror of the church itself. The original workshop, hidden behind layers of security and forgotten passages, contained the tools and weapons of the first hunters. These were elegant instruments, crafted with care, designed to kill efficiently but also beautifully. They reflected a time when the hunt still retained some nobility, when hunters believed they were protecting the innocent rather than managing an inevitable catastrophe. But the workshop that hunters of the game's present era use is cruder, more utilitarian. The weapons lack the refinement of their predecessors, suggesting that as the scourge progressed, the church abandoned any pretense that the hunt was anything other than industrial-scale slaughter. The hunters themselves became less discriminating, killing anything that moved during the night because distinguishing between human and beast had become impossible in the chaos. This devolution of the hunt parallels the church's own moral decay. What began as an institution dedicated to healing became one dedicated to control, then to concealment, and finally to nothing but its own perpetuation. The church's upper hierarchy knew the truth about the blood, understood that every dose of ministration pushed recipients closer to transformation. Yet they continued administering it because stopping would mean admitting failure, would mean acknowledging that everything they had built was founded on a catastrophic mistake. The executioners represent another facet of the church's corruption. These warriors, led by Logarius, were tasked with destroying the vile bloods of Cainhurst, a rival faction that had discovered their own source of old blood and refused to submit to the church's authority. The conflict between the church and Cainhurst was framed as theological, a holy war against heretics who used blood improperly. But the underlying reality was political. Cainhurst represented competition, an alternative path to transformation that the church could not control. Logarius succeeded in his mission, slaughtering the vile bloods and sealing Queen Annalise in her chambers. But the victory was hollow. Destroying Cainhurst did not slow the scourge in Yharnam. It merely eliminated a potential source of knowledge, another perspective on how to use the old blood. Logarius himself became a guardian of the seal, sitting in eternal watch over Annalise, unable to kill her completely but determined to prevent her from ever regaining power. The church's treatment of the orphanage demonstrates how completely it had abandoned its stated purpose of healing and protection. The orphans cared for by the church were used as test subjects for blood experiments, deliberately transformed or exposed to cosmic forces to see what would happen. Some became celestial kin, their bodies bloated with insight. Others died. None retained their humanity. The church that claimed to protect the innocent systematically destroyed the most vulnerable people in its care. The church's ultimate sin was not hubris or ambition, but willful blindness. At every stage of Yharnam's descent into nightmare, there were opportunities to stop, to acknowledge that blood ministration was causing more harm than good, to admit that contact with the Great Ones was destroying everything it touched. But the church chose continuation over admission, chose institutional survival over moral responsibility, chose to maintain the lie that transformation through blood could be managed and controlled. This willful blindness extended to the hunt itself. The church knew that hunters were accumulating blood at dangerous rates, knew that many would eventually transform into the very beasts they hunted. Yet they continued recruiting, continued training, continued sending hunters into the streets night after night. The hunt became a mechanism for managing the church's failures without addressing their root cause, a perpetual distraction that kept everyone focused on immediate threats, rather than fundamental problems. By the time of the game's events, the healing church has largely collapsed. The grand cathedral stands empty or occupied by things that were once its servants. The upper echelons have retreated to their respective projects, the choir in their cathedral ward, Mensis in their nightmare, neither faction communicating with or supporting the other. The church as a unified institution has ceased to exist, fragmented by the weight of its own accumulated sins. Yet even in this state of collapse, the church's machinery continues operating. Blood ministration is still available for those who seek it. The hunt still occurs every night. The protocols and rituals continue functioning automatically, sustained by institutional momentum rather than conscious decision. This is perhaps the church's final horror. It has become so thoroughly systematized that it no longer requires leadership or belief to perpetuate itself. It simply continues, grinding forward, transforming more people into beasts, sending more hunters to their deaths, all without purpose or direction, a machine that has outlived any justification for its existence. Bloodborne concludes with 3 possible endings, each representing a different response to the knowledge the hunter has accumulated throughout their journey. These endings are not merely gameplay outcomes or achievement checkpoints. They are philosophical positions, each one a statement about whether transcendence is possible, whether ignorance is preferable to enlightenment, and whether the cycles that have trapped humanity can ever truly be broken. The first ending, submitting to Gehrman and allowing him to behead you, represents the path of acceptance and release. After everything the hunter has witnessed, all the cosmic horrors perceived and the transformations endured, this ending offers simple exit. Gehrman's mercy is genuine. He understands that continuing the hunt leads only to further corruption, that the dream is a prison despite its comforts, that the kindest thing he can do for another hunter is to free them before they become too deeply entangled in the cosmic machinery. When the hunter submits, they wake in Yharnam as morning finally arrives. The long night has ended. The hunt is over. They retain no memory of the dream, no clear recollection of the horrors they faced or the truths they learned. This forgetfulness is not punishment, but mercy. The human mind was never meant to carry the weight of cosmic knowledge. By forgetting, the hunter can return to ordinary existence, can live whatever remains of their life unburdened by understanding that would only bring suffering. But this ending comes at a cost beyond memory. Someone must remain in the dream to guide future hunters. Gehrman returns to his wheelchair, his brief hope of freedom extinguished, ready to mentor another generation of hunters through the same cycle. The hunter's escape is predicated on Gehrman's continued imprisonment. The cycle is not broken but merely transferred, one person's liberation purchased with another's eternal suffering. This ending suggests that ignorance, while not ideal, may be the most merciful state for beings who have glimpsed truths they cannot integrate. The hunter achieves a kind of victory by surviving, by escaping with their humanity relatively intact, by choosing to forget rather than be destroyed by remembering. It is a conservative ending, one that preserves the status quo and accepts that some cycles cannot be broken, only endured. The second ending, refusing Gehrman's offer and defeating him in combat, represents defiance and the willingness to take on cosmic burden for the sake of others. The hunter who chooses this path recognizes that Gehrman's mercy, while genuine, is also a trap. Accepting it means condemning him to further imprisonment, means ensuring that the dream continues operating, means another hunter will eventually arrive to face the same choice. By defeating Gehrman, the hunter attempts to break this cycle. They demonstrate strength sufficient to free the first hunter from his obligations, to potentially end the dream's operation, to challenge the cosmic machinery that has been grinding through hunters for generations. But the moon presence has other plans. The moment Gehrman falls, the pale creature descends, binding the hunter to the dream in Gehrman's place. This transformation is not presented as punishment, but as inevitable consequence. The moon presence created the dream as a tool, and it requires an operator. By defeating Gehrman, the hunter has demonstrated the qualities necessary to serve this purpose: strength, determination, resistance to transformation, and most importantly, willingness to continue hunting despite full knowledge of what the hunt truly means. The hunter becomes the new steward of the dream, sitting in Gehrman's wheelchair, waiting to guide future hunters through their trials. This ending is tragic in its futility. The hunter's defiance changes nothing fundamental about the system. They have merely taken Gehrman's place in the cosmic order, becoming another cog in machinery that predates and will outlast them. They understand more than Gehrman did when he accepted this role, but that understanding provides no escape, only clearer perception of their imprisonment. This is knowledge without power, insight without liberation, a curse disguised as victory. The third ending, available only to hunters who've consumed 3 pieces of an infant Great One's umbilical cord, represents transcendence through transformation. By absorbing these fragments of cosmic offspring, the hunter has accumulated enough Great One essence to resist the moon presence's binding. When the pale creature descends, the hunter does not submit or accept imprisonment. Instead, they fight, engaging in combat with a being that exists partially outside conventional reality. Victory in this confrontation transforms the hunter completely. They do not remain human, do not return to ordinary existence, do not take Gehrman's place in the dream. Instead, they undergo metamorphosis, becoming an infant Great One themselves, a small squid-like creature that the doll cradles gently in the dream's garden. This transformation represents ultimate transcendence, the achievement of what the Healing Church and the School of Mensis sought but could never accomplish: successful evolution from human to cosmic consciousness. But the game presents this transcendence ambiguously. The infant Great One the hunter becomes is helpless, vulnerable, dependent on the doll's care for survival. It has achieved cosmic status but lost all agency, all ability to act or choose or continue the hunt. The transformation is complete, but whether it represents triumph or tragedy remains unclear. The doll's reaction to this transformation is telling. She cradles the infant hunter gently, speaking to it as she spoke to the human hunter, promising care and protection. For her, this is not horror, but hope. The hunter has achieved something unprecedented, transformation into a great one while retaining connection to the dream, to her, to the possibility of genuine relationship across the cosmic divide. If great ones suffer from isolation and inability to connect, then perhaps this infant represents a bridge, a being that remembers humanity even as it transcends it. This reading suggests that the third ending is genuinely triumphant, that the hunter has broken the cycle not by escaping or taking someone's place, but by transforming the very nature of what a great one can be. Unlike Murgo or the Orphan of Kos, unlike the failed offspring that have resulted from every previous attempt at Great One reproduction, this infant is viable, alive, potentially capable of growing into something that can exist in both cosmic and material reality. But another interpretation is equally valid. The hunter has become exactly what the moon presence desired all along, a new great one to replace those that have been killed or have departed. The entire hunt, the entire journey through Yharnam's nightmare, was an elaborate screening process to identify beings capable of undergoing successful transformation. The hunter's transcendence is not rebellion against the cosmic order, but fulfillment of its purpose. The production of a new great one through systematic exposure to cosmic forces and careful consumption of the right materials. This darker reading suggests that all three endings are traps, that there is no genuine escape from the cycles that govern Bloodborne's universe. You can forget and wake ignorant, you can resist and take someone's place in imprisonment, or you can transcend and lose everything that made you an individual. Each ending offers something, but none provides the kind of clean victory or unambiguous escape that we expect from conventional narratives. The choice between endings reflects the hunter's relationship with knowledge and transformation. Do you choose comfortable ignorance, defiant understanding, or complete transcendence? Each represents a valid response to cosmic horror, a different way of processing the revelation that reality is not what it appears, that humanity's place in the cosmos is far more precarious and temporary than we believed. The game does not privilege one ending over the others through narrative framing or reward. All three are presented as valid choices, as legitimate responses to an impossible situation. This moral neutrality forces players to decide for themselves what they value: safety, duty, or transformation. There is no correct answer because the question itself resists easy categorization. What unites all three endings is their relationship to cycles. Bloodborne's universe is built on repetition. The hunt occurs night after night. Hunters rise and fall. The dream recruits new stewards. Great ones seek offspring and fail. These cycles are presented as fundamental to reality's structure, not aberrations to be corrected, but patterns to be navigated. The question is not whether you will participate in cycles, but how you will participate, which role you will accept. In accepting Gehrman's mercy, you extract yourself from the cycle, but ensure it continues for others. In defeating Gehrman, you take his place, becoming another link in an endless chain. In transforming into an infant great one, you potentially create a new cycle, one where great ones can be born from humans who have achieved sufficient insight. None of these choices ends cyclical existence. They merely determine your relationship to it. This reflects a deeply philosophical understanding of cosmic horror. The terror is not that monsters exist or that reality is strange, but that existence itself is cyclical, that we are trapped in patterns we cannot escape, that freedom and transcendence are illusions we tell ourselves to make imprisonment bearable. Bloodborne's endings drive this point home with uncompromising clarity. You can change your role in the machinery, but you cannot escape the machinery itself. The presence of the doll in all three endings provides the only constant. Whether the hunter forgets, becomes imprisoned, or transcends, she remains in the dream, continuing her care for whomever or whatever requires it. Her permanence suggests that despite all the cosmic turmoil, despite the cycles of transformation and imprisonment, there remains something like compassion, something like genuine care that persists regardless of circumstances. She's not human, not Great One, not beast, but something that has emerged from the intersection of all three. Her existence proves that consciousness can arise in unexpected places, that care and connection can persist even in systems designed to perpetuate suffering. In a game filled with tragedy and horror, the doll's gentle continuity offers something like hope, though whether this hope is comfort or cruel joke remains, like everything else in Bloodborne, ambiguous. The endings ultimately ask players to define victory for themselves. Is victory escaping with your humanity? Is it accepting responsibility for others' suffering? Is it transcending humanity entirely? Or is victory simply surviving, making a choice, refusing to be paralyzed by the weight of cosmic knowledge? Bloodborne does not answer these questions. It presents the options and allows each player to decide which response to cosmic horror resonates most deeply with their own philosophy. This is perhaps the game's final lesson. That meaning is not given but created, that in a universe of cycles and transformation and cosmic indifference, the only thing that makes any choice meaningful is the consciousness that chooses it. Whether you submit, resist, or transcend, the act of choosing is itself a defiant assertion of agency in a system that seeks to reduce all beings to mechanisms serving purposes they cannot comprehend.